It's official. When it comes to masks, two is better than one. Never before seen video of the January 6th riots shows just how close protesters came to causing serious harm to lawmakers. And drunk Tom Brady. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Thursday, February 11th. I'm Jill Wagner. Carlo is off, but I am here with Mosheh Oinounou, founder of Mo Digital Consulting, Instagram newsman, and a friend of the pod. Good morning, Mosh.
Good morning, Jill. Instagram newsman is I'm most proud of that title right now.
Forget the Emmys, forget the Peabodys. It's all about Instagram.
Forget CBS. It's all about Instagram. Yes.
By the way, a drunk Tom Brady, we're going to get into it, but I think a drunk Tom Brady is such a happy Tom Brady. There is like no anger, no sadness, just pure joy in that Tom Brady.
I can't wait to get to that and what we're learning overnight about the Bruce Springsteen drunk news.
Okay, so it's like come for impeachment news, stay for drunk Bruce Springsteen. All right, but let's actually start with the pandemic. Overall cases of coronavirus still declining in this country, but that UK variant is really picking up steam. It is now confirmed in 34 states and spreading particularly fast in Florida. The CDC is now also urging Americans to double up on their masks and face protection. Some new research shows that the transmission of the virus can be reduced by up to 96.5% if both infected and uninfected wear tightly fitted surgical masks or a combination of cloth and surgical masks. Also, some new research from Mount Sinai finds that about 10 to 30% of all COVID patients will suffer from long haul symptoms, which doctors say should be a wake up call to young people that they need to take this virus seriously. When we talk long haul symptoms, it means things like serious fatigue, shortness of breath, digestive issues, brain fog, racing heart. Some even can develop type 1 diabetes. It's not clear because this virus is still relatively new. It's not clear if these will eventually go away or if this is going to be this lifelong chronic type of thing. But either way, pretty scary.
Totally. And I don't know if you know folks like this. I've certainly heard from a number of them who are suffering these symptoms. They might have had COVID last almost a year ago now, and they're still having trouble tasting. One thing, Jill, to put these numbers into context is as of this morning, we have almost 28 million. There have been 28 million confirmed COVID cases in the US. And that doesn't account for the early days when people couldn't get tested. So it's definitely higher than that. So just looking at those CDC numbers, that means anywhere between 3 and 10 million Americans could fall within that statistic of long haul symptoms. Some of the folks on Instagram who've been following me have been reacting to the long haul stories by saying they still feel the brain fog, they feel massive fatigue, and a lot of folks talk to me about their terrible taste issues, that every time they eat, they might feel nauseated, they don't taste anything, or everything tastes a certain way, and that is a real bummer for them. By the way, in the COVID front, the other story I was tracking yesterday that I thought was interesting, concerning, and something that we're going to have to take seriously is the AP poll on vaccine news. The good news is 67% of Americans either have taken the vaccine or plan to, but 1 in 3 are either skeptical, reluctant, or totally opposed. And it broke down geographically, demographically, who those people are. And remember, 67% may seem pretty good, but to get to herd immunity in this country, they think we need to get closer to 80%.
It's troubling. I had Eugene Daniels from Politico on the podcast yesterday, and we were talking about the real hesitancy as well in Black and brown communities. And just historically being kind of mistreated by the medical community. And the one thing we keep saying is we're all in this together, right? Like the herd immunity is what it actually sounds like. It doesn't work. We can't all get back to any sense of normalcy unless we reach that 75 to 80% threshold. So I know you have some advice, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the skepticism is for good reason, given the history. But it does mean that we do need to reach out. There needs to be a concerted effort on the part of the government to reach out to trusted people in those communities. I did do an interview earlier this week with an epidemiologist, Dr. Seema Yasmin, out of Stanford, who actually specializes in misinformation. And I talked to her a bit. Some of the questions I was getting from folks is like, how do I talk to vaccine skeptics in my family or my friends? And her first piece of advice was to ask people why. That the mistake that people make is assuming you might know why somebody might be skeptical. So ask them why. There's hundreds of reasons, from the people who believe that Bill Gates is implanting computer chips in us to people who have, legitimate concerns or questions. And the second piece of advice is not to throw too much information in studies. People have a tendency to send their family and friends like, here's 27 studies as to why you're wrong, which is, she said, is not a great tactic. This is a very emotional thing, and it isn't necessarily something to make an intellectual argument about to folks. So those are the first two steps: listen and don't inundate them with information.
I think that's some great advice. Okay, let's talk a little bit about impeachment, because yesterday was a big day. House Dems made their case for impeaching former President Trump in a 7-hour presentation. They showed graphic and never before seen footage from the Capitol riots, crossed with a sampling of Trump's most incendiary tweets and speeches. The focus of the presentation was in trying to draw a clear line between Trump's rhetoric, starting from before the election, and then the riots on January 6th, as well as holding him accountable for not calling off his supporters soon enough. The trial is going to resume at noon today. Trump's defense is going to try to make the case that Trump shouldn't be held responsible for the actions of the mob. I mean, I think if that's what it boils down to, right? It just, everyone is in agreement that what happened on January 6th is unacceptable. I think that the question is just, can you tie it directly to Donald Trump?
Absolutely. It's going to come down to how one defines incitement, if you will. And by the way, Trump faced some questions about this in 2016. There were some legal cases against him when, if you recall his rallies in 2016, he said, he would say, kick out that protester, kick their butt, whatever. And they actually took him to court, and the judge found that what Trump had said in that case was protected by First Amendment. So that's a case. That's a case Republicans are making. One of my takeaways yesterday, Jill, frankly, is Democrats. By the way, now that they're 7 hours in, they're halfway done with their presentation, so they have one more day today. Then Trump's defense begins in earnest tomorrow. The videos were stunning to see security have to literally have Mitt Romney run the other direction because of how close he was to protesters. You saw behind the scenes Mike Pence get evacuated with his family. You saw Chuck Schumer running up and down the halls with his security, trying to figure out how to get out of there. We said on January 6th, and we spoke in the days afterward, like, this could have been worse. Well, this video shows it really could have been worse. But ultimately, there's a certain number of folks who've already have their minds made up. And so despite the evidence, it appears it appears that we're no closer to conviction, even after yesterday's presentation.
Something that we don't really talk enough about on this podcast, foreign policy. President Biden putting some new sanctions on Myanmar, a response to that military coup in the country. The orders are going after Myanmar's generals where it hurts, the wallet, blocking them from accessing about $1 billion in U.S. assets.
Remember, Jill, down in Myanmar, which we still officially in several countries refer to as Burma, we had sanctions on them for decades until they created democratic reforms. This is a country that had military rulers for almost 50 years until they allowed the first elections less than 10 years ago. Aung San Suu Kyi was elected. And see if this sounds familiar. So an election happened in November. Neutral observers from the UN, US, EU, state election boards in the country say it was legitimate. The opposition claimed there were 10 million fraudulent votes, but provided no evidence for that fraud. The opposition said the elected leader should be arrested after stealing the election. Still with me? And then this is where things change. The country with no real democratic history besides one election and has had 3 military coups, then put the leader under house arrest, and the military took over. And so that's where things changed for Myanmar versus some familiarity with our election. And so we'll see what happens there. We'll see if these sanctions make an impact. Myanmar, the U.S. really kind of opened up relations after the democratic reforms. Now we're shutting things down again. We'll see if that has an impact on the country, which does depend on tourism. But one of the things that, is pretty stunning to watch is the courage of those demonstrators in Myanmar. If you've seen any of the pictures in recent weeks, including over the weekend, they're defying the military there to get out and protest where there's no real First Amendment, clearly. And one thing to be on the lookout for is these pictures of them doing the three-fingered salute popularized in Hunger Games. It's really a big thing there, and it's a sign of defiance against the authorities.
Let's talk a little TikTok. Do you remember when the big business story was the Trump administration forcing TikTok's parent company ByteDance to sell TikTok to an American company? Well, according to the Wall Street Journal, those plans have now been shelved. TikTok had been pursuing a deal with Walmart or Oracle. The Wall Street Journal reports the Biden administration is now reviewing the deal and looking at at President Trump's more aggressive approach to the potential security threat of Chinese tech companies. Mosh, my favorite part of the TikTok story from just all of these months was when TikTok was basically saying that Trump was ghosting them. Like, you cannot make it up that they were trying to get in touch with the Trump administration, and it was like no one was picking up the phone. Wow.
If you're looking for an example of just kind of the ad hoc nature of the previous administration, it was the entire TikTok policy rollout, if you call that. So typically White Houses, like, they come up with a strategy, they come up with a policy, they run it through policy committees, they figure out anticipated reaction. Well, the previous White House ran through a Twitter account. And so when the former president had an idea, he would throw it out there. So he had ideas in regards to TikTok, let's shut them down. So basically, through some strategy on the part of TikTok and luck, basically just the complete disorganization of the previous White House, it appears they succeeded in kind of persevering through having to force sale half the company to America, or to American companies. So courts repeatedly sided with TikTok in the fall, ruling that the Trump White House effort appeared to just be politically motivated. No real evidence or solid findings found that the app was a risk to American national security. And now Biden's Justice Department is going to drop the remaining cases. And so it looks like TikTok has persevered and continues to be strong. But we'll see, and so ultimately now it's the social media competition that they face and less more regulatory efforts. At least that's what it appears. And so the other social media story that I'm watching this morning is about Mark Zuckerberg. So we know that Zuckerberg copied Snapchat in rolling out Instagram stories. We know that he tried to copy TikTok's magic in rolling out Instagram Reels. And so far, both sides still doing pretty well. Well, so apparently, according to the New York Times last night, he is now setting his sights on copying another big successful social media app you've been talking about on the podcast in recent days, Clubhouse. So they report that Zuck showed up on Clubhouse Sunday evening to chat about augmented and virtual reality, set up an account. You see his picture. He's got like a username. Then apparently he followed up on that appearance on Clubhouse by calling certain people at Facebook, being like, I order you to create a similar product, according to sources there. Jill, are you on Clubhouse?
Okay, so when you say that we've talked about Clubhouse, you mean I've actually begged people to invite me to Clubhouse. Is basically how it's gone down here on the podcast. I'm happy to report. Thank you, Frank, for your email, and Ansu and a couple of others who just took pity on me. I am now on Clubhouse, and it's like a little confusing. I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on. You're kind of just dropping in on conversations, but audio audio is ironically the next big thing in social media.
So you feel a bit like The Weeknd during the halftime show, kind of like making his way through the tunnels. That's
exactly
how I imagine you. My take on Clubhouse, it feels a lot, if you remember the AOL chat rooms of yesteryear, of our youth. It just feels like 20 years later. And there's some interesting people on it. I know, like, Mark Cuban has shown up and Elon Musk has shown up. But honestly, so far to me, Clubhouse feels like a bunch of rooms with those people who friend you on LinkedIn that you're like, who are these people? And they all like sound really impressive, but like you listen to their audio and you're like, eh. So I keep an open mind for Clubhouse, and I also keep an open mind for whatever Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook come out as their copycat of Clubhouse.
Wait, so I was in a room yesterday listening to a conversation, and the subject of the room was Elon Musk and Kanye West on Clubhouse or something. And so I thought I was listening to a conversation. I thought I was going to be listening to a conversation with Elon Musk and Kanye West. And it was just a conversation about why it would be a big deal for Clubhouse if they came on Clubhouse. And I'm like, wait, so is Kanye West on this in this conversation or not? Because if he's not in this conversation, I'm dropping out and watching, the impeachment stuff. Anyway, it's interesting. Twitter also has sort of a copycat, or I don't know whose came first actually, but Spaces is what it's called. And I was listening to a conversation. Cheddar CEO John Steinberg was doing a conversation that was really interesting actually yesterday. I wonder if that feels like it could take off because people are already on Twitter. I think having these types of conversations, albeit in short little tweets, but perhaps that's where they can expand into these more nuanced conversations.
Absolutely. It seems like a natural spot for Twitter, which is kind of the conversation among newsmakers and politicians. And, sometimes you have some fascinating threads. So the fact that you can have that in audio there, it remains to be seen whether Jack Dorsey and the folks at Twitter could really capitalize it because you talked about their earnings statement yesterday. They're in sore need of figuring out new growth opportunities over there.
Let's talk a little sports. The NBA now going to require all teams to play the national anthem before games. So this decision came a day after Mavericks owner Mark Cuban said that he decided not to play the anthem before games. And he said the reason was that he said they respect the country and the anthem, but also respect people who don't feel that it represents them. Now, in response to this decision by the NBA, Cuban has said, okay, no problem, we'll play the national anthem. It stayed pretty under the radar. I'm wondering, Mosheh, if it's because fans aren't in the arena for games this year. So perhaps, it's not top of mind. But I know you polled your readers on Instagram and asked kind of what they thought about Cuban's initial decision not to play the anthem. What did you find out?
So it was a really fast moving story, right? Because it was a story that dropped in The Athletic like a little over 24 hours ago. And I think to your point, yeah, only there weren't that many people in the crowd, so less people to notice certain things, like there's no anthem. So I asked folks yesterday when it was first out, when the first headline came out that he wasn't playing the anthem. And it was basically, checked this morning, about 3,000 responses, and it was a 60-40 split. 60% of folks support Mark Cuban's decision, 40% against it. Might be indicative. Remember, the Instagram audience is a much younger audience. I think my average follower is in their late 20s, early 30s. So that's kind of where that came down. And the big question I got from folks, frankly, as I asked it, is like, hey, why do we even play the national anthem at sporting events? Why is that a thing? Especially from people from foreign countries who are like, what is this thing in America where you guys play the national anthem and the flag is everywhere, etc. In certain European countries, you see that, but
I never really thought about it, actually.
we as Americans just understand that you attend a sporting event and you stand for the anthem. And so I looked into this, and this is fascinating. And the history goes back about 100 years, almost exactly 100 years. So it goes back to the World Series in 1918, which was happening during World War I. It actually happened a couple months before World War I ended. It was the Red Sox versus the Cubs. Babe Ruth was still on the Red Sox. He was the pitcher for the Red Sox. And America had just lost 100,000 troops. In World War I, the mood was glum. Babe was pitching a shutout in game one. And so in a move to invigorate the Cubs fans in Chicago, a band struck up the national anthem during the seventh inning stretch. People started saluting the flag. There was this moment on the field where the players saluted the flag, and people were like, wow, this felt great. So they continued that tradition through that 1918 World Series when the series went back to Boston. By the way, the Red Sox went on to win, and this was part of the 100-plus year glut of the Cubs not winning World Series, I should say, as a Cubs fan. But anyway, they started they started already when they were back in Boston at that series. They brought wounded soldiers onto the field. These are traditions that we still do today. But it was born during that World Series, and so then it picked up in baseball for major events. But it wasn't like a daily occurrence because back then you didn't have really great PA systems. You'd have to bring in a live band, and not every team wanted to bring in a live band for every game. So anyway, I could go. We could do an hour on the history of the national anthem in sports because then eventually it becomes a thing during World War II, and there was a whole controversy of the NFL during Vietnam, and then the commissioner of the NFL imposed the national anthem and standing on all players during the late '60s as that culture war was happening. Anyway, it's a fascinating history there. I do think I'll say one more thing, and I went back to Mark Cuban's tweets over the summer during Black Lives Matter when the anthem came up, and he was going back and forth with Ted Cruz, which he tends to do every couple months on Twitter. And Cuban said, regardless of how you feel about the NBA, how would you feel if every day when you went to work, they made you stand and sing for the national anthem every day when you showed up to work? Like, is that something you'd want to do? Because that's how it feels at the NBA.
It's a really fascinating discussion. Mosh, thank you for the history there, because I'd never even thought about it. But it makes a lot of sense. And I'm kind of still giggling about having to bring in, a live band to do the national anthem. All right. On the sports beat, a much lighter story. We got to talk drunk Tom Brady. If you went on Twitter yesterday, you would have seen Tom Brady trending. But this time, though, drunk Tom Brady. He, of course, was celebrating his 7th Super Bowl win with his new team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They had a boat parade. And then at one point, Brady is seen tossing the Lombardi trophy from one boat to another. And then he was also seen walking, but like with a whole lot of help, kind of, if you just had a bender of a night and your friends helping you walk into your apartment. He's getting rave reviews. Even people who don't like him now love him.
It reminded me of like some scenes from college of like freshman pledges, like walking home from our frat house. Like that's what literally Tom, like just smiling, getting held by somebody. And like, Tom Brady's a controversial figure. There's a lot of people whose teams have lost to Tom Brady through the years, but I think everyone yesterday agreed that watching drunk Tom Brady was entertaining. He became a true Florida man yesterday on a boat, tossing a huge, very valuable trophy from one boat to another. The boat behind him, I think, had Gronk and a few of his receivers. So he was throwing a ball of sorts to the wide receivers. It does look like his incredible physical abilities at age 43 don't necessarily apply to his liver.
Well, this is what happens when you don't eat bread for 20 years. You've got nothing to absorb the alcohol. In the other celeb drinking news, though, Bruce Springsteen, this is so shocking. Bruce Springsteen got a DWI. Something feels off about this story, though, because as we learn more, we're finding out that his blood alcohol level was actually below the legal limit, right?
Totally. By the way, the headline this morning in the New York Post is Blunder Road. I'm sure they're going to have lots of opportunities for takeoffs on the songs. But yeah, yesterday, but we are learning a lot of unfortunate things through the years on people who are kind of elevated in American society. I was like, no, you can't destroy Bruce. Like, I don't want to hear too much bad things about Bruce. So what did we learn so far? That the Asbury Park Press, one of the local newspapers out of New Jersey, reports that he actually only blew a .02. The legal limit in New Jersey is a .08. The report is that apparently he was driving in a park area, a national park area in Jersey in mid-November. A fan asked him to stop by his car. He pulled over as a good celeb does, took a photo with him. Apparently then the fan offered him a tequila shot. Bruce took the one single tequila shot with the fan, but apparently a cop was watching the entire thing. So then Bruce, after the tequila shot, gets back in the car, starts driving, and that's when he got pulled over by the cop. So apparently it was a single tequila shot, and there's going to be a court case in the coming weeks. But I feel like this headline this morning is going to bring the Bruce crowd out, being like, really? A .02?
And I feel like it's almost... and I am a diehard Bruce fan, passed down from my dad, who's a diehard Bruce fan. So we love back when you could go to concerts, we used to go to concerts together. But I feel like part of the story makes him even more endearing. He stopped to talk to a fan and then did a tequila shot with a fan. Obviously, you don't drive after a tequila shot, but um, he he was below the legal limit. I don't know. I don't want to get myself into trouble here, but um, I I don't know. You're right. The Bruce crowd, who does not have to defend him very often because he's a pretty non-controversial guy, I think is going to be out in force.
And it lends a question to yesterday's decision. Jeep very quickly pulled his Super Bowl ad, the much talked about Bruce Springsteen Super Bowl ad that aired on Sunday. They pulled it off of YouTube yesterday after this headline came out. I mean, it just shows how quickly some of these corporations react when a negative headline comes out. So does, obviously they're a car company, and nobody says you should get in the car immediately after a tequila shot. But he was below the legal limit. So what does that really mean? I think there's going to be a lot of discussion in the weeks to come. And again, we'll see what the New Jersey court system does when the case comes up in a couple of weeks.
All right. Unfortunately, Moshe, we got to leave it there. But we got everything in: impeachment, drunk Tom Brady, Bruce Springsteen, Myanmar. It was a good show. Thank you so much, as always, for coming on and co-hosting. We appreciate it.
So looking forward to coming back soon.
All right. That's what you need to know for Thursday, February 11th.